But the third one, and the most exciting, is casing expansion, and that's the graphic I sent along. And that is often wells, as they mature, they leak up the outside. You can get the real McCoy if it would fit. You could probably get yourself a whole rig to set up at.
Don't start giving people ideas.
If shutting down the oil sands was all it would take to arrest the GHG growth in GHG emissions and carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, I think we could crowdfund that globally in a heartbeat.
Good morning and welcome to episode 7 of Crownsmen Energy. Today we are joined by David Yeager. He is the president and CEO of Winterhawk Well Abandonment. He is also the author of From Miracle to Menace. He is here to discuss the energy sector in Alberta and Canada. Now, before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. We are sponsored by Savannah Equipment. Are you working on pipelines, oil and gas projects, renewable energy, or LNG, and need to save some cash? Savannah Equipment has industrial pumps, electrical equipment, from motors to transformers, and even surplus pipe and much, much more available now. Visit SavannahEquipment.com to view all their inventory. Again, that is SavannahEquipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day. We are also sponsored by PowerZone. When you need a specialized team of world-class engineers for your oil and gas pipelines, dewatering, or any fluid handling needs, you want to visit powerzone.com. In addition to their inventory of rebuilt pumps, motors, engines, they also have an amazing team to design and engineer your systems no matter the challenge, no matter the location. Get in the zone with PowerZone. Visit them at powerzone.com. Now let's get started with episode 7 of Crownsmen Energy.
Hello and welcome to Crownsmen Energy. I'm your host, Jared Downey, and today on the show we have David Yeager. David, thank you for coming on the show. I'm actually going to let you do a little intro to yourself. You're an author, you're the president and CEO of Winterhawk, so can you give us a snapshot, and then I want to jump right into some topics here.
Oh, beautiful. I'm a second generation oil field service. My dad was in the business, actually since Leduc. Grew up in the business, and I have been a writer. I used to own an oil field trade magazine. That's when I started writing over 40 years ago. I've also been the founder and 3 TSX listed oil field service companies. So I've been in this business all my life at multiple levels, as you said in the intro, both as an investor and an operator, worked in the field. My joke is I worked in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter, in the middle of nowhere. And this Winterhawk assignment is actually the company was founded by my brother-in-law. And he had a serious accident. So I just came out of retirement on the oil field service side to help my brother-in-law. It's a fascinating technology. We'll get to that. But my retirement job is writer and policy commentator. And regrettably, there's certainly a lot to talk about these days.
There is. We're gonna cover quite a few topics, and I really wanted to kick off this show talking about the well abandonment. Because there's obviously now there's funding coming from the federal government, and so I want to talk about two things. There's going to be a certain portion of our population that they hear the term well abandonment, but they don't actually know what it is. So first, can you just give us a snapshot? I think we have a chart that you sent over. We'll bring that up on the screen as well. Can you walk the audience through first the simple version of what it is, and then we'll talk a little bit about the government program?
Well, there's been something like going back to the early days of when we found gas in the late 1800s and Turner Valley a century ago. There's been something like 500,000 or more holes drilled in what's called the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. And well abandonment is simply when you're drilling a well and there's nothing in it. It's called, you abandon the well, you just give up on it. And then there's the end of life retirement, which is called well abandonment. And it's really mature asset retirement. Every resource industry does that. If it's a pulp mill and it's no longer functional, economically viable, or you're supposed to clean it up. Same thing with a mine. So the same thing with the oil and gas wells. Is after a well is no longer economic to produce, you're meant to abandon the wellbore and reclaim the site. And so there's quite a number of them. For some reason, our industry's mature asset cleanup obligations have become more newsworthy than those of others. But every industry has to do that. Yeah, well, if you go to Detroit if you want to see mature asset retirement that never got retired. There's it's the same thing if you go to find abandoned shopping malls. It's all the same thing. Is there's commercial assets that are no longer economically viable, and the owner is meant to tidy it up before they go home. And in the oil and gas industry, we have hundreds of thousands of these things, and so it's become a political issue.
What does it entail usually? I know Winterhawk does some of the technology, so we'll get into it. But in general, what it actually does entail, though, doing the abandonment shutdown properly? What's the? Well, I guess let's get into the government funding. What is the government funding designed to accomplish?
Well, the problem is the owner of the license. When you license the mineral rights from the Crown, most of it's government owned, you have a fiduciary obligation in the lease to clean it up when it's done. What's happened, though, is unfortunately, because of the economic downturn, the collapse of cash flow with which to pay for these abandonments or well site reclamations has exceeded the pace at which they're being done. The other thing is there's a case to be made, and sometimes there's a question of when you should truly abandon a wellbore. And that is because sometimes new technology comes along and you've discovered a new technology that could resuscitate that asset. So there's commercial reasons,
right,
fiduciary reasons, and economic reasons. The program itself is multifaceted. There's a subsurface portion where you go into the well and you seal it off. You have to go actually put a rig on the hole, enter the well, put a plug in the bottom, pour cement, cut off the casing, seal it, and then you do the site reclamation or the surface reclamation. Often there's a pump jack or a tank that has to be cleaned up. And then there's a site reclamation, which has there been any chemical spillage? Have you spilled any oil? Have you dumped any diesel? Is there salt water or whatever? So it's three phases. There's the downhole side, the surface equipment, including what pipelines may be in place, and then there's the site reclamation. In a perfect world, say on a farmer's field, in a perfect world, you'd never know it was there. They would abandon the well, clean up the site, put the soil back on, you'd cultivate over it, and you would never know there was ever a well there. And that's happened in the case of really hundreds of thousands of wells in Western Canada in the last 40 years.
How much, like a program like this, I can't remember the dollar amount right now, but it was, obviously it was a fair chunk of money, but how much business will that actually create, though? And of course, it's sort of a short-term, it's sort of a bandage on a big wound for the energy sector. So, but how much opportunity does that create actually for employment in Alberta and for some of these companies that are sitting idle right now to activate?
I'd say it's fantastic in terms of when the alternative is doing nothing. It's spectacular. To abandon or to totally reclaim, to do the complete site reclamation on a simple well. Let me define a simple well. That would be a shallow gas well down in southern Alberta that never produced any water or oil. The site's clean, the site's simple. You may be able to abandon that wellbore, clean up the surface reclamation, reseed it, return to normal, like $50,000. Some of the more complex site reclamations, the all-time record of a leaking gas well, I believe somewhere in British Columbia, was $8 million. And so it really depends. Yeah. So on a given wellbore, on a given site, you probably need 20 or 30 different services, and they really depend on depth, complexity, and what the contents were. But 1.7 billion is a significant amount of money, and on a good year, the total investment upstream in oil and gas on a typical year, the total investment might be $20 billion. So this could be up to 10% of all the activity that might happen in a good year. So when you're in a situation where oil for a while went negative and production is shut in, this is really welcome relief to keep small town Alberta working and small town Western Canada working. It's welcome that stimulus activity. And it is indeed environmental work and cleanup work that wouldn't be done otherwise. So it's a very welcome program for the working oil patch.
Right. And I was going to ask, so we've had a couple people on our show that have, they're bringing on these technologies that are going to essentially, that they hope increase the recovery, increase the amount that can be recovered from a well. When these wells are you said you plug them and you put in the cement and all this is completed. Can that ever be activated again? Is it a huge process to, if technology comes along that makes that a valuable asset? Can it be re-entered?
No, you're gonna have to re-drill it. If it makes more sense if you've got a well bore. I'm talking about the hole in the ground. If that well is properly abandoned with sealed and shut off, it's probably cheaper nowadays to just twin it. Well, this goes back to what I said earlier. If you look at about whether or not you really want to abandon the well, a great number of the wells, for example, people see the statistics. There's something like 100,000 inactive wells in Western Canada. A lot of them are related to low gas prices, very low gas prices. Yeah, so in the end, you just as soon wait if there's a chance that natural gas prices could improve. For example, LNG Canada or the market improves, you'd actually just turn that well back on. So you have to be careful when you talk about the terminology gets confusing. There's something called the Orphan Well Association. Now, those wells are abandoned not only by the owner. Their ownership is abandoned. The wellbore hasn't been abandoned. The company that owned them went broke. And so they become an orphan well, an ownerless well. So the person with the legal responsibility to reclaim the site is financially insolvent. So that is an issue. But that's, at last count, that was only 5,000 wells. I would say of the 100,000 odd wells that are suspended in Alberta, they're not all owned by delinquent owners. It's not a massive case of oil and gas industry irresponsibility. If the price of natural gas would go back to anything like what it used to be, many of these wells would come back on stream. So when you're inactive wells is a giant bundle of assets, if you will. There's expired wells that are waiting site reclamation. There's suspended wells that are shut in for economic reason. And then there's truly abandoned wells, abandoned meaning the owner's gone broke, they're off in the Orphan Well Association, and that has become a responsibility of the Crown.
So that would lead me to the question, David, that this amount of funding that's coming from the federal government for these abandoned wells, will it be enough to take care of all the wells that are actually expired that will not come back online?
Probably not. Probably not. You can see at say there's an average cost of $100,000. I think that's only 1,700 wells at most. So if you
I see.
I think
This is 5,000.
Really yeah, well, it depends on the type of the well, the cost, and the complexity. But again, not all that money is going into well bores as well. Some of those funds are being used to clean up abandoned pipelines, surface facilities, old gas plants. It's not all going into well bores per se. That's the number we talk about because that's the number, the easiest one to count. But there are also associated with these well bores. There's abandoned facilities. Some wells have got situations where the well bore is abandoned, but the site isn't cleaned up. The farmer's road, the access road, and the site hasn't been cleaned up, so it's all over the map. But no, it's not going to solve the problem entirely, but it's certainly going to stimulate the activity. It is going to keep a lot of people around for when the industry recovers, keep a lot of companies solvent, keep that skilled labor force from having to do something else if there was anything else to do. And it'll help the balance sheets of the companies. What you have to do if you own oil and gas leases, you have to, on the liability side of your balance sheet, you have to keep a scorecard. You have to have a provision for future asset retirements. It also affects your borrowing capability of the bank. So this improves your asset liability ratio with your banker. So it fixes up a number of things. Actually, it's a multifaceted and very worthwhile deployment. What's interesting about this type of funding is when it comes from the government, they actually recover quite a portion of it through payroll deductions and fuel taxes.
That's right.
Yeah, because it goes directly into field activity. So the crown, I gotta say the crown because I see Crownsmen in the background. The crown is the term for the government, representative of the government. We call it a crown mineral license, which is the history going back to the Queen, right? Anyway, so the crown, the government does recover with this type of economic stimulus. they do recover a more significant portion than you think in direct payroll taxes, fuel taxes, excise tax, industrial activity that wouldn't occur otherwise. They get it in PST, depending where you are. They get it in GST. So it's not really, they call it a subsidy. It is. But they do claw some back.
Right, and the hope is hopefully the prices will go back up, and then these companies can stay active, keep people employed. 5 years from now, the idea is that they actually make more back on the investment, right?
They should. It should. There is a tremendous case. The industry will come back. We'll get to that. But there is. It's an investment in the infrastructure, both human and physical. I mean, the capital infrastructure, you have the equipment in the background. So you got a train and a couple excavators, a little piece of a John Deere sticking around your show.
Yeah, we need someone to send us some oil models for the back. So if you know anybody who wants to donate.
Oh boy, you can get the real McCoy if it would fit. You could probably get yourself a whole rig to set up at.
Don't start giving people ideas.
Anyway, so there's both the capital assets, but more important, there's the human assets.
Yeah.
The old saying goes is oil is found in the minds of man. You still need the brain power to do it. So this is also an investment in our human capital, which is essential to the future.
Well, thanks for breaking it down, David, because I know it is one of these things that's kind of floated around the news for a while, but I guarantee 80% of the people that hear it actually don't know what some of the details of it. So thanks for breaking it down. And I want to jump through. I want to get to your book. I want to talk about Winterhawk. So you said you're the president. You're the president and CEO of Winterhawk Technology. Let's get into what they're doing, their business model, and some of the new technology that they've got in the market right now.
Winterhawk was conceived. My brother-in-law is a very clever design engineer. He cut his teeth with Imperial Oil in the early days of steam-assisted gravity drainage at Cold Lake, and he's a problem solver. And so with Winterhawk, he's really come up with three different technologies. One of the first ones was actually site reclamation, and this was invented. There was a tender put out some time ago to clean up the oil spill in Kuwait. They left something like 300 million barrels of oil was left over after the first Gulf War. And he was instructing over there, and they put out a tender. And of course, because he came from the oil sand, separating oil from sand is where he grew up. So one of them is a site reclamation technology. The program got canceled, but that lives on. That's a very fascinating patent. We're just exploring whether if somebody wants to use that for using what's called on-site, in situ or in place, cleaning up contaminated soil on site. The second one was a plug, an advanced plug for a well that used a combination of expandable steel rings and asphalt as a sealant. But the third one, and the most exciting, is casing expansion, and that's the graphic I sent along. And that is often wells, as they mature, they leak up the outside. There's a cement in a well, they run steel pipe in a well that's cemented on the outside. Over time, the cement deteriorates, and you get a leak up the outside called a surface casing vent flow. And his idea was controlled casing expansion. We would run in and expand the casing from the inside, recompress the cement, and shut off the gas. And that is probably the most exciting technology in the suite right now, is casing expansion. I have been involved in my career in the wellbore abandonment construction business for some time, and I've followed my brother-in-law's technology. And so when I was asked to come in and help out with the project when he took ill, I took the slide deck around to about 20 different oil companies. So what do you think of this? And pretty well everyone is intrigued. So we're just in the process of doing field testing. We did our first commercial or non-commercial. Had to subsidize. We did our first field test of the new setting system just a couple months ago. We did expand casing in the well, and the first time in history, actually. And we did actually disrupt the gas flow. We're just doing some more field testing. We're hoping to be back in the field in the next couple of weeks. But this will be a game changer if we can prove it works, and it has to work. In the sense, it has to work to be commercially viable. This will be the most exciting development in reducing the cost of shutting off subsurface methane emissions in history. And so it's an exciting project, and everyone agrees it is commercially useful. I stepped in October to help out. Obviously, the COVID, like everyone else in the world, got a little bit of a curveball coming out of left field that we hadn't planned on. But
Yeah, no kidding.
overall, I do believe the genie's out of the bottle, and that casing expansion is going to become a routine part. The early research was done on this theory of expanding the casing and reformatting the cement in the well. Was originally conceived by Shell and the University of Louisiana back in 2014. And they wrote technical papers on how this ought to work. Shell has gone down the path of a system that accomplishes the same thing in a much different way. And they have done some field testing. So we're not lone rangers in this field. One of the largest oil companies in the world actually sponsored the development of similar technology. I think we have a better mousetrap. I think that the method that we're using to expand the casing is more effective. And we're actually have a bit of dialogue going on with Shell about working with the regulators to have them understand why this might work. But I do believe that this will become, again, the genie's out of the bottle. I believe this is an entirely novel and unique innovation. And I do believe that using casing as something other than a barrier in your well will be adopted worldwide in the not too distant future. This is this isn't going to go away. If our tool doesn't work, I can't see why it won't. But I mean, it is still R&D, and we are in a challenging business environment. But this will be part of the industry's toolbox for a long time to come, and a real positive advancement in getting ahead of the game.
Well, I guess the hope is if you can get it to the market within this time frame of when the funding for the well abandonment is coming through, that's a good opportunity for the company to grow in the market with properly sourced funding at play. Is that right?
I think actually it doesn't really matter when it works. I think obviously having all this activity in this specific area of the industry, if it worked right now, it'd be better. But I do believe that we have cut I was just actually applying for some government funding, and I was going through one of the things you have to do to get emissions reduction funding is you have to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions of the process. So what I'm just working on as we speak is I looked at the conventional method of shutting off a leaking well, which is you bring on a rig and you haul in all the equipment, you blow holes in, you pump cement, and then when we're done, we'll be able to come in with a wireline truck and do it in about 3 hours instead of 2 days with one piece of equipment instead of 10. And the actual greenhouse gas reductions in the setting process are reduced by over 90%. And this means we're done burning diesel fuel and gasoline. But more importantly, the cost is reduced by also about 90%. So this is one of those, that's really the definition of any successful technology, as you know from the many people you talk to, is if you can come up with something that does an essential job at a fraction of the cost in a more efficient process, you got a winner. So the textbook definition of what new technology is meant to do is right in the wheelhouse of the casing expansion technology.
How long has this been in development for?
About 5 years. It is possibly, poor Dale, probably the worst 5 years in the history of the industry. Well, if you look back to any,
no kidding.
There should be some control mechanism of when genius strikes. Is when you get the brainchild to save the world. It would be really nice if you could do it when the world wasn't disappearing around you. So he has actually what he's accomplished in this last 5 years, of course, goes back to late 2014 when the price of oil collapsed the first time, the ill-fated OPEC meeting, and so 5 years from now, we were on a slide from which we've never fully recovered. So what he did in the time what he accomplished and the interest he gained and the capital he raised in the market environment he was in is a testament to the cleverness of the invention, really. If this were back in what I classify as a normal market, and I'm going to call a normal market the one I was fortunate enough to spend most of my career in, this baby we'd have got this thing field tested, and the bugs worked out. It would have been commercial in no time.
Well, the oil and gas sector really changed. I mean, a lot of ways it changed the world. The combustion engine and things like that, and now it sort of gets dumped on, and so which which really dovetails very well into. It's almost like someone should have wrote a book about kind of the the rise and fall of the oil and gas industry. So I think you came up with a good name.
Yeah, from miracle to menace. Yeah, I was. It was spring, about 2 years ago, and the battles were raging, and the Energy East had just been canceled because of opposition in central Canada. The battle was on. John Horgan had been elected BC, and the battle was on over Trans Mountain. And we were getting all this advice. The Trudeau government had been elected, and we'd lost the Keystone XL pipeline in late 2015 because of Obama. We lost the Northern Gateway because of an election promise because of Justin Trudeau. We'd lost Energy East due to the complexities. We'd lost Trans Mountain was war over Trans Mountain, and everyone's saying, well, look, Alberta, why don't you just do something else? And it sort of triggered a nerve in me, do what else? People don't seem to understand what it is. So the reason I wrote the book, I picked the title from Miracle to Menace, because of course, as you said in your intro, that this really was the miracle fuel that powered the industry. It started with coal, but the second that they discovered that oil was better than coal, in the sense oil really got launched by the British Navy when they discovered the density, they could the power of oil as opposed to coal to power their warships. So it became a strategic resource in early last century after it was discovered in the Middle East. But anyway, it was seen as a miracle until recently. And so the point of the book is that people would say, well, you people in Alberta really ought to do something else, that perhaps you ought to diversify in renewables. And the point is the main point of the book is Alberta without oil is Manitoba with mountains. I mean, there's nothing here. If you look at the geography of Alberta, we're in the middle of nowhere. We've got 1,000 kilometers to the west, to the Pacific Ocean across the Rockies. There's nothing to the north. I mean, there's nothing but the Arctic. To the east, there's really no major concentration of population until you get to Toronto. And to the south, we share the U.S. border with the smallest and most underpopulated and economically disadvantaged states of the Union. So what are we going to do here? We didn't even get the good dirt. I mean, in the agricultural side, Manitoba, Saskatchewan got way better arable land. We've got this tilt where because we slope downward from the Rockies. So when we discovered Alberta was doing very, very poorly economically until Leduc in 1947, it was a have-not province. And then they discovered oil at Leduc. It was inside North America. Oil was on a roll, and we never looked back. And so Alberta went from really an economic basket case coming out of the Second World War to one of the top producing oil and gas producing jurisdictions in the world. And so when people say you ought to do something else, what I'm finding, in the same way that we went through this when we talked about inactive wells, was when you say that we ought to do something else, it would be nice if you know what you're talking about. So this goes back to the things the industry talk about, 10% of the GDP, the largest resource sector by any measure. So when you say that you want to get out of the oil business, you really ought to do something else. What you're talking about is taken to its logical extension. Half the people in Alberta are going to have to leave and go do somewhere else. We can't all come to the West Coast and become whale watch tour operators. And so I figured that I would write this book, Miracle to Menace. I'm not arguing with the climate issue. It's just when you say to Albertans, first of all, there's this myth that we can get off oil tomorrow. All we need is more political will, which is just complete rubbish. There's no evidence of that anywhere. And secondly, the idea that Albertans can do something else, go into renewable energy, is just preposterous. I mean, you cannot export interruptible wind and solar energy anywhere from Alberta, let alone we serve. Remember, Alberta, we serve markets. We serve the west coast of BC, California, the Gulf Coast of Mexico. We send oil and natural gas all the way to Quebec. We used to send gas to the east coast. That's been displaced by Marcellus oil. And so Alberta produces 3.9 million barrels of oil every day, and we consume 365,000 in gasoline and diesel fuel. So we have something like 3 million barrels a day of oil plus the gas. And then we sell that to people that seem to need it because they don't have it. And so that's what I want. Alberta, a carbon story. And that's why I told the story, because what made Alberta what it is carbon, coal, oil, and natural gas. So that was the theme of the book. Miracle to Menace tells the story. And here we are, and living the dream.
Does it sort of walk through like all those things you touched on? Does it walk through the actual history? How much time in it is sort of spent on the history and then modern day? How did you sort of put that together?
There's 3 sections. The book is called the first section of the book is called Carbon Development, and that's how Alberta went from zero to hero. Really, what we had when we started the early discoveries up to the modern era. So the first section on carbon development ends with the numbers, really, the mathematical size of the industry, the jobs, the employment, the GDP. And more importantly, there's a secondary industry in oil that really nobody talks about, and that is the petrochemical industry, the oil service industry. We build oil field service equipment and sell it all over the world. And so, again, the whole point is, here is when you say you don't want to do this anymore, here's the numbers, and here's the history of what you're talking about and how it was developed. The second section I wrote that for my own interest, was called Carbon Politics. And carbon politics is, how did oil go from a miracle fuel to the end of life on Earth as we know it? And so I talked about both the federal politics, the provincial politics, the National Energy Program, when they love it and they hate it, the pipelines and so on. But it really went into the history of climate change, all the problems we have in the world. How did climate change get to the top of the list? I'm a senior citizen. I'm in my mid-60s. When I was a kid, we were worried about a nuclear war. Actually, I used to come home from school and ask my parents if we were going to build a bomb shelter. Like I just do. The world's always had problems. The problems have been peace and hunger and war and medicine, and somehow climate change eclipsed every other problem on the Earth as the number one problem we in the West should solve. How did that come to be? So there's that story. And then the last section is carbon future. And that is, how does it look? And what's very interesting is all the statistical reports indicate, no matter what we're told, that oil and gas has no future. There's no statistical evidence of this based on population growth, economic growth, and GDP. There's no credible forecaster, in the absence of a non-existent technological investment. There is no evidence that we're going to be using less fossil fuels in 20 years than we are today. The world wants in. And so there's also, so I went through the future of carbon, I went through the fossil fuel divestment movement, I went through, there's a whole chapter called All the Good News You've Never Heard. And that is the child mortality rates falling, the education rates increasing, the birth rate declines as countries modernize. There's just a ton of good news out there. But the old saying and the old saw in the news business, I've been a writer for 40 years, they say no news is good news. In fact, good news is no news. Good news doesn't sell. Did you know, for example, 7.7 billion people did not die yesterday? I'm just saying, if anybody cares. And then it ends up with carbon future. And I end the book with saying that Alberta's really good at this. And what we should be doing is we should be the innovators leading the world to more efficient oil and gas production. Of course, that's what we're doing at Winterhawk. I actually put it in the book. What we are is very, very good. And we're a highly regulated jurisdiction. We care about carbon. We care about the environment. We care about safety. Instead of getting out of the oil business, and you've seen this before as we try to fight back, the world needs more Canadian oil. We should become the epicenter for an intelligent, paced carbon transition and become a leader in carbon sequestration, in advanced wellbore abandonment techniques, in advanced processing, and all those things. We can do that. Hydrogen, I'm a big hydrogen fan. I'm a big carbon technology fan, graphenes. We should, if you take the hydrocarbon molecule apart, there's hydrogen and carbon. Well, hydrogen in itself is the cleanest fuel on Earth. Carbon is the building block of life, civilization, graphene, and so you go. You really want to get out of the hydrocarbon business? Okay, if you think this through, you don't. So that's how the book ends. Is the third section is optimistic. We're going to be in the fuel business for a long time, and we should be supported, not victimized.
You know what struck me is, you see it sometimes. It's sometimes it's easier to go after someone who's doing it well. It's kind of like a star, the LeBron James of basketball. It's really easy to criticize him because the spotlight is on him, and he's the best player on the court. And there's 8 other guys on the team that are not pulling their weight, but he gets dumped on, and he says something that people don't like, and everybody attacks him. And it really, when you were talking about it, it really reminds me of that, because Alberta is sort of, in the world of oil and gas, is like this lighthouse on the hill type thing, and yet it's kind of got attacked. Even to the point where it's Alberta oil is in a way is getting landlocked because you can't reach agreements to twin pipelines and all sorts of things like that. And I hope that at some point, and I think maybe even little things like this show and the book you're writing, and that it'll help people just at least educate them on, pick your battles. Don't run LeBron James out of town, because your team probably isn't going to win if you do, right?
It drives us nuts here in the West. We've got a tanker ban on the West Coast, and that was politically active, and they're running tankers full of foreign oil down the St. Lawrence. It is really frustrating. 97% of the oil in the world is not produced in Alberta. It used to be 100 million barrels a day. The forecast indicated it'll come back. And there are no other jurisdictions held to this standard. No major oil producing country fights elections on shutting down its major resource industry. None. Mm-hmm. And so the polarization that you're seeing in Alberta politics, the Wexit, the anger, the malcontent, it's real, and it's because that the debate is shallow and disingenuous, and that's the point I made in my book. If you know everything in that book, and you think that I actually said at the end of the book when I wrote, the book is straight reporting, but when I wrote the epilogue at the end, if shutting down the oil sands was all it would take to arrest the GHG growth in GHG emissions and carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, I think we could crowdfund that globally in a heartbeat, and we'd be at the top of the list. Where do I sign? You can have, we'll do it. But it won't work. This is the tragic part. Is that it's symbolism. Is that some Canadians are willing to sacrifice. They call it virtue signaling, and sacrifice their fellow Canadians so they can sleep better at night. The climate change alarms me. I'm doing something about it next. And so those of us in the business, those of us that sell you the fuel so you can drive to the pipeline protest to keep you warm in the winter when you'd freeze to death because the wind and solar isn't working, we really struggle with the shallowness of the debate. But the book is not a rant. The book is all third-party sources. There's an introduction where I tell everybody why I wrote it, and there's an epilogue at the end where I tell everybody what I learned. But the rest of the book is, I ended up doing quite a bit of research in human behavior. How can people depend on oil and hate it at the same time? What is it? So I ended up reading books on human nature, trying to peel back the onion to fully understand how this debate could be this shallow and this disingenuous. And I had some success. I learned a lot, and so will anybody who reads it.
Yeah, I hope people from seeing this do order it, and I think it is important. And it's a great name. It really is. If you are interested in the energy sector, it's this perfect name for a book about it. I want to talk a little bit about you gave a presentation. Where did you at the Canadian Association of Geophysical Contractors, and you did a presentation. And I want to talk a little bit about the oil and gas recovery as well, just sort of as we're wrapping up the show. And I don't want to do the thing where it's only bad news is the only news that we talk about. So can you talk a little bit about what you see moving forward that could be positive for the industry?
The first thing that people don't realize, because good news doesn't sell, is the natural gas business has improved tremendously. The price of natural gas is materially higher at this time of year than it has been. This was a technical issue regarding the gathering system within Alberta. The NOVA system, that a lot of the new gas is coming out of the northwest from the Montney. There's the geological formation that we share with British Columbia that's going to supply the LNG market. And the storage is in the southeast. And the main connecting line had to go down for maintenance. So they were pumping the spot gas. So what would happen during construction season in the summer is the price of AECO spot gas would go to zero. And I believe the slide that I think the average price in June or this time of year in 2018 was only 57 cents. And a year ago was 75 or vice versa. And this year it's 2. So the interesting thing about natural gas is yesterday's zero is today's hero, in the sense that the companies that had natural gas, which used to be the most prosperous commodity in the basin, have gone to have very stable cash flow. And so the gas business is stabilized compared to a year ago. So as we crown our beer, and I'm not saying it's not awful, budgets have been slashed, but gas has materially recovered. The second thing that's happened is after all the agony we went through with the price recoveries, the degree to which oil's bounced back. Now, yesterday we got clobbered, lost 10% because it was over recovered. But as you recall, we started the year at 61 bucks and then went to minus 40 one day, that awful day. And then since that, we almost tagged 40 bucks here this week again. And so that is a number that nobody forecast as recently as 2 months ago. Now, part of that is lost on volume, in the sense quite a bit of oil has come off the market, but everybody was agonizing. So the price of it has come back, and all indications are it will come back. The area there, I've got a slide I put together from the Energy Information Administration, which is out of Washington, D.C., which is their forecast. The latest one is just this month, early in June, and they're looking at worldwide supply and demand out to the end of next year. And we were producing, the world was consuming 100 million barrels a day going into the COVID crisis. And they think that's coming back later this year, and by the end of 2021, we'll be back. The question is, where's the oil going to come from? So what has happened, what's happened with this price collapse is there has been a major reduction in spending in new supplies. And so the old saying, the old saw goes that the best thing for low oil prices is low oil prices. So there's been huge cutbacks. The natural decline rate of most of the reservoirs in the world is 5 to 7%, meaning that if you do nothing, if we produced 100 million barrels a day this year, next year, if you don't drill, you're at 93. One of the old sayings from the 1980s, that a grocery store is very profitable if you don't restock the shelf, but you're not going to be in business very long. So because of the collapse in prices, people are taking a hall pass, or taking a sabbatical on their reinvestment. So as demand recovers, and it will recover because people want to go back to work. The thing that people have to appreciate is that oil, whether it ought to be or not, and regardless of what they say in the paper, oil is still an essential commodity in everyday life, in everyday modern life. So demand is going to come back quicker than supply. So a lot of people are looking out, and they say this is going to recover later this year. It's already recovering. I would say that today, in June of 2020, cash flow from production, from existing production, is materially higher than people thought it was going to be as little as 60 days ago. Now, we're not out of the woods yet. There's a lot of issues with bank covenants, and there's lots of problems. Is this real? Will it last? As the price goes up, will oil production come back on stream? But what I liked about that Energy Information Administration forecast, this is the second most of the two agencies in the world studying this subject. There's the International Energy Agency in Paris, and there's the EIA out of DC. And this is one of the top two forecasters in the world. And they're looking at supply and demand, the decline rates, all the factors, and they're not promoters. They're looking at a big comeback. Another aspect of this is the light tight oil, the Permian Basin phenomena was really, that is the most expensive oil on God's green earth. That is going to be a real struggle, getting people back into that business. The oil sands are different. The oil sands, once a plant is up and running, we're getting back to the price where oil sands again are quite stable and developing a positive cash flow. So it's really, really hard. You really got to look under a lot of rocks to find good news. But I put together that handful of slides just to say the light at the end of the tunnel, at the end of the tunnel is not a train. The last slide that I put together was the employment data, and that was the latest Stats Canada employment data from April to January, the various declines. And so, the oil and gas guy's been hurting, but it's sort of interesting. Sectorally, the part that's been clobbered has really been tourism and recreation. They have really, really hurting. So the oil jobs, because it is like food and agriculture's got a minor decline of only a couple of percent because you got to have it. Oil was fine for a while because it was in storage, but I guess the message there is that again, that the idea that you're doing okay because somebody's doing worse is not particularly helpful if you can't pay the rent. Yeah, but on the other hand, I can say that this sector, and we have been seeing that the energy industry or the oil and gas industry has the ability to help the country recover if you give us a chance. And all the data that I've presented in that slideshow indicates, look, Canadians want to go back to work. We need to go back to work. This is a sector that if you just quit throwing up roadblocks, if we didn't have to fight with our fellow Canadians, here's a sector that can go back to work soon, create good paying jobs, start paying taxes, and when they start opening restaurants and hotels again, somebody will have the money to go there. So it's not as, again, good news is doesn't sell. I'm more bullish on the sector than many, but of course I have the luxury of sort of semi-retired. I don't have to go duke it out. There's many.
And we had the luxury, David, of having you on and actually walking us through some of these things, and it was nice to be able to. I always like the shows, and I've said it many times on the shows. The episodes where we can zoom in and out, so we get right down to a technology that's in an oil well, and then we're zooming back out on looking at it on a global scale. It's my favorite type of show. So I want to thank you for coming on. I think, I go around to, when there was conferences and live events, I go around to a lot of events. There's a lot of speaking in the bubble, which you have to do. You have to educate people within your circle and raise the bar and develop new technology. But I think it's heavy industry, mining, energy. Again, I've said it many times on the show, I think we need to do a better job of reaching out to people and just educating them, not even telling them how to think, just letting them know some facts, the new technology that's been developed. And so I really do appreciate you coming on and reaching out to that portion of our audience and just giving them some education. I hope they buy the book to learn a little bit more.
There you go. Just on that subject, the interesting thing that hurts those of us in the resource business is it's still all the resources, and I'm talking mining and forestry and oil and gas and agriculture. This is what still pays the rent of this country. But 80% of the population now lives in urban centers, and that's where the votes are. And that is the polarization. There's so many of Canadians, of our fellow Canadians, when they go to the gas pump, they don't know where it comes from. When they go to the grocery store, they don't know where it comes from. When they build a house, the lumber shows up. They go to Home Depot, and there it is. And we really have to, as a resource-producing country, this challenge is not confined to oil and gas. It's confined to all primary resources. That's still what we do. We're good at it, and we ignore or make it difficult for this sector at our own peril. And I love the platform. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today.
Yeah, I thought maybe what we should do is on the buildings. I live in an apartment in Vancouver, and what we should do is on all the buildings, we should just have a list of resources that went into developing that building, like a plaque on every single one. That would change people's perspective. So thanks a lot, David. I do appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you, everybody, for watching. That was a great interview from my perspective. I hope you enjoyed it. David did. He's so good at walking through. We had done pre-interviews and planned out what we were going to touch on, and he did such a nice job of walking us through these multiple facets of the industry. I hope he comes back on. Thank you for watching. There'll be a quick sign off from Gowdy to tell you where to go, where to subscribe, where to support all these wonderful things we're doing together. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode of Crownsmen Energy.
Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. Also, if you would like to help support the production of the show, head on over to crownsmen.com/donations, where you will find two options, the $5 monthly subscription option and the support heavy industry one-time donation option. Again, that is crownsmen.com/donations. Thank you so much for your support, and we will see you on the next episode.